My husband tried to sell me for $10 in front of 300 guests. He lifted his champagne glass as though he were making an ordinary wedding toast, smiling with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. Then he pointed at me. "Who will take this useless wife?" $10. That's all she's worth. The ballroom exploded with laughter. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors while forks paused halfway to expensive dinners. Some guests laughed because they found it funny. Others laughed because powerful people were laughing. A few lowered their eyes, pretending they hadn't heard a thing. I stood beside him in a silver evening gown that suddenly felt heavier than armor. My fingers remained loosely wrapped around my untouched wine glass, though I could no longer feel its stem. My heartbeat was steady, surprisingly steady, as if my body had decided panic would only waste precious energy. My husband basked in the applause. He loved audiences more than people. Every joke needed a victim, and tonight that victim was me. He leaned closer, the scent of expensive cologne barely masking the bitterness of whiskey. "Come on," he whispered with a grin only I could hear. "At least smile. You're entertaining everyone for once." The room blurred for a second, not from tears, but from the realization that this wasn't an impulsive insult. It had been rehearsed. The microphone, the timing, the expectant faces. He had invited 300 guests to witness my humiliation because public cruelty was the only language that made him feel important. I didn't defend myself. I didn't cry. Silence has a strange effect on guilty people. It forces them to keep talking. He spread his arms dramatically. $10. "Final offer!" Another wave of laughter rolled through the ballroom. Then, from the back of the room, a calm voice cut through every sound. 10 million. The laughter died instantly. Every head turned. My husband's confident smile froze, as though someone had quietly stolen the ground beneath his feet. For the first time that evening, I allowed myself to breathe. My name is Elena, and for 8 years, I had perfected the art of disappearing while standing in plain sight. People assumed I was quiet because I had nothing to say, when the truth was that I had learned early that speaking only gave arrogant people more targets to aim at. When I married Victor, everyone called him brilliant, ambitious, and charming. They described me as lucky. No one noticed that every compliment directed at him came with another piece of my identity quietly stripped away. I stopped introducing myself by my profession, because he always interrupted to explain it better. I stopped sharing ideas at dinners because he laughed before anyone else could respond. Eventually, I discovered that silence was less exhausting than defending my own worth. The strange thing about being underestimated is that people become careless around you. They reveal their greed, their lies, and the plans they think you're too insignificant to understand. I watched Victor build his business the same way he built his reputation, with borrowed credit, polished speeches, and invisible hands doing the real work behind him. Those invisible hands were often mine. I reviewed contracts, solved crises before they reached his desk, and quietly protected the company from mistakes that could have destroyed it. Every success made him more confident, and every confidence made him underestimate me a little more. By the night of the charity gala, Victor believed he had convinced the world that I was simply his decoration. What he never realized was that decorations don't keep records, remember conversations, or prepare for the day they are finally pushed too far. The charity gala wasn't the beginning of Victor's cruelty. It was simply the first time he decided to perform it under a spotlight. Months before that evening, the insults had become so ordinary that most people mistook them for harmless jokes. If I offered an opinion during dinner with investors, he would smile politely and say, "Elena has a wonderful imagination," before repeating my exact idea as if it had just occurred to him. The room would nod in admiration while I quietly returned to my meal. At home, the pattern never changed. My birthday gift would arrive a week late because he had forgotten. Anniversaries became networking dinners. Even simple conversations ended with him glancing at his phone before I had finished speaking, as though my words were background music instead of a voice he had promised to cherish. The people around us noticed more than they admitted. I caught sympathetic glances from waiters, uneasy smiles from assistants, and awkward pauses whenever Victor mocked me a little too casually. Yet no one interrupted. Wealth has a remarkable ability to make witnesses question what they have clearly seen. So I stopped asking for respect. Instead, I began observing. I memorized the confidence in Victor's smile whenever he believed he had diminished me. I noticed how easily people revealed themselves when they assumed I wasn't paying attention. By the time invitations to the gala were mailed, I already knew something humiliating was coming. I just didn't know he would choose to auction my dignity before hundreds of applauding strangers. When the laughter finally faded, the silence that followed felt heavier than every insult Victor had ever thrown at me. 300 faces turned toward the man, who had calmly offered $10 million. But I wasn't looking at him. I was watching my husband. For the first time in years, Victor wasn't performing. His smile had vanished, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty he couldn't hide. His eyes searched the room, trying to understand who had interrupted the script he had written so carefully. In that single moment, I realized something I should have understood long ago. He wasn't fearless. He was only confident when he believed I would stay silent. That realization changed everything. I didn't need to argue with him or expose him in front of the guests. I didn't need revenge fueled by anger. Anger fades too quickly. I wanted something lasting, the quiet consequence of every choice he had made. As the mysterious bidder walked forward, I noticed several members of Victor's board exchange uneasy glances. They knew the man. More importantly, they knew he wasn't joking. Whatever was about to happen had nothing to do with money anymore. Victor looked at me, expecting confusion or gratitude. Instead, I met his eyes with complete calm. It was the first time in our marriage that he couldn't read me. And that frightened him far more than any public confrontation ever could. At that moment, I stopped thinking about surviving his humiliation. I started thinking about what my life would look like after it. People often imagine revenge as something loud, a slammed door, a public confession, a dramatic confrontation. Mine began with a notebook, a locked drawer, and years of careful records. Long before the gala, I had developed a habit Victor laughed at. I documented everything: meeting notes, contract revisions, late-night phone calls, emails requesting my analysis, and drafts carrying my comments before they were presented under his name. At first, I kept those records simply to stay organized. Over time, they became a quiet timeline of who had truly built the foundation beneath his success. Before marrying Victor, I had worked as a corporate compliance consultant. Details were my profession. Patterns were impossible for me to ignore. Whenever a document changed, unexpectedly, or a signature appeared, without proper authorization, I noticed. I never accused anyone without evidence, but I never discarded evidence either. The gala convinced me that preserving my dignity required more than leaving the marriage. It required leaving with the truth intact. The following morning, I contacted a family lawyer I had trusted years earlier. I didn't ask for revenge. I asked for strategy. We reviewed financial records, ownership agreements, and every document connected to the company. Everything would be done legally, quietly, and at the right time. I made no threats. I posted nothing online. I smiled when people expected me to defend myself and remained silent when they waited for an emotional reaction. Victor mistook my composure for surrender. He never understood. That silence is most dangerous when it belongs to someone who has already decided exactly what comes next. 3 weeks after the gala, Victor walked into the boardroom expecting another routine quarterly meeting. He straightened his tie, greeted everyone with practiced confidence, and barely acknowledged me as I took a seat near the end of the polished oak table. The man who had offered $10 million that night was already there. He wasn't a bidder at all. He was the company's largest private investor. Without raising his voice, he placed a slim folder in front of every board member. Inside were emails, contract revisions, and documented timelines showing who had resolved compliance issues, negotiated key partnerships, and quietly prevented decisions that could have exposed the company to serious legal and financial risks. My name appeared where Victor's had been spoken for years. No one accused him of a crime. No one needed to. The evidence spoke with a calm certainty that left no room for performance. Questions replaced compliments. Board members who once laughed at Victor's jokes now studied him in thoughtful silence. One by one, they asked for explanations he couldn't give without contradicting documents, carrying his own signature. Victor glanced toward me, searching for anger, triumph, or pity. I offered none. I simply gathered my notebook when the meeting ended and signed the final papers, ending our marriage. As I walked past him, the room remained silent. This time, no one laughed. For the first time in years, the truth occupied the center of the room. And Victor finally understood what it felt like to be underestimated. News of the board meeting spread quietly, not through headlines or scandal, but through conversations behind closed office doors. The same people who had once dismissed me as Victor's quiet wife began revisiting old meetings, old decisions, and old memories. They realized how often I had been present just before a crisis was solved, and how rarely Victor had acknowledged anyone but himself. A few guests from the gala reached out with awkward apologies. They admitted they had laughed because everyone else had laughed. I accepted their words without bitterness, but I never tried to rebuild those friendships. Respect that depends on public opinion is too fragile to trust. Victor's reputation didn't collapse overnight. It simply lost its shine. Invitations became less frequent. Board members questioned his judgment more carefully. People who once admired his confidence began noticing the arrogance that had always been there. Nothing dramatic happened. The illusion just stopped protecting him. As for me, I discovered that peace feels unfamiliar after years of walking on invisible glass. My mornings became quieter, not because the world had changed, but because I no longer measured my worth through someone else's approval. I returned to my own work, signed my own name, and let my achievements speak without interruption. Looking back, I don't think the most painful moment was when my husband tried to sell me for $10. It was realizing how easily a room full of people accepted that I could be priced at all. That's why this story matters. Humiliation only survives when silence belongs to the wrong people. The moment you stop protecting someone else's cruelty, you begin protecting your own dignity instead. People sometimes ask whether I regret staying as long as I did. I tell them regret is a poor place to build a future. The years I spent beside Victor taught me something no university or career ever could. Character is revealed most clearly when someone believes there will never be consequences. I didn't win because he lost. I won because I stopped allowing his opinion to define the value of my life. The divorce was finalized quietly. I returned to consulting, this time under my own name, choosing clients who respected preparation more than performance. My work spoke for itself, and for the first time in years, every accomplishment belonged to me alone. There was no one waiting to interrupt, no one eager to claim the credit, no audience deciding whether I deserved to be heard. Occasionally, I would hear updates about Victor. His company survived, but his influence never fully recovered. People listened to him more carefully now, not because they trusted him, but because they had learned to question what once seemed unquestionable. That was consequence enough. I never wished for his destruction. I simply stopped protecting him from the results of his own choices. As for the man who offered $10 million that night, he later admitted he never intended to buy anything. He had recognized humiliation disguised as humor and decided to interrupt it with something impossible to ignore. Sometimes courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's a single sentence spoken at exactly the right moment. When I think back to that ballroom, I no longer remember the laughter first. I remember the silence that followed, because that silence marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. It was the moment I stopped asking the world to recognize my worth and started living as though it had never been in question. No one can place a price on your dignity unless you hand them the right to name it. I never gave Victor that right again.